Vamos dar a palavra ao Baur. Ele é o presidente do famoso Farm Sanctuary. Foram as suas investigações com agentes infiltrados e trabalho de lobby que levaram à aprovação das primeiras leis americanas de proteção dos animais de pecuária. Foi considerado pela revista Time como a consciência do movimento pela alimentação. Welcome, Jean. Such a privilege to have you back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Maria, and it is a pleasure to be back here again this year. I visited for the first time last year, and I was very inspired by what I saw in terms of creating solutions to the problems with our food system and the problems with the way human beings have been living on the planet and the way we have been mistreating other creatures, living in a way that is unsustainable, destroying the planet. And what is happening here, I think, not only in terms of the vegetarian plant-based community, but in terms of the connection to the municipality and the government and institutions is critically important. So it is a joy to be back here and to be part of this. And I will talk about the history of Farm Sanctuary, the work we have done, and the evolution of the Farm Sanctuary movement. And I think what is happening at Quintas das Águas is a very good example of the future of what sanctuaries could be looking like, including places like Farm Sanctuary. So, I grew up like most people, eating meat without thinking about it. And most of us grow up with certain patterns of behavior, certain habits that we don't really question. And one of those habits is eating other animals. And if everybody around us is doing it, we assume that it is normal. And then we start coming up with rationalizations why it is okay to do this. But what we do to other animals is egregious, it is cruel, and the good news is that it is not necessary. We can live well without killing other animals. And if we can live well without causing unnecessary harm, why wouldn't we? So, I grew up in Los Angeles, a long way away from farms, but I felt that it was important if I was going to work on these issues to have firsthand experience and knowledge of what happens to animals in the farming system. So I spent a lot of time in the early days visiting a place called Lancaster Stockyards in Pennsylvania. It was the largest stockyards in the eastern part of the United States. It was a pillar of the community. And this is a place where thousands of animals were being sold on a daily basis that were, in some cases, so sick they could not walk. They're called downed animals, animals who are down on the ground, can't even stand. And they would literally be hooked up to chains, dragged onto trucks, and taken to slaughter. And we tried to prohibit this. We thought that this was something that was not okay. And we even found living animals on the pile of dead animals behind the stockyard. And our first rescued animal was a sheep named Hilda. And as we came upon this dead pile, there were dead cows, dead sheep. There were also dead pigs. And we saw this animal who had been dumped here like garbage. And we were shocked. And so we took her off the dead pile, brought her to a veterinarian, thinking she would have to be euthanized. But as the veterinarian started examining her, she stood up. And she recovered completely. And she lived with us for more than 10 years. And rescuing Hilda didn't only heal Hilda, it also helped to heal us. Because seeing this cruelty day after day was very difficult. It is inhumane, it is abusive, it is painful to see this suffering on a routine basis. And rescuing Hilda made us heal as well as helped her heal. And so we felt that this stockyard should stop selling these sick animals, animals that couldn't even stand and walk, should either be given proper veterinary care or they should be humanely euthanized. It was a very reasonable position, we thought. But early on, during our campaign to prevent downed animals from being marketed here, we got a lot of pushback because Lancaster Stockyards was a pillar of the community. It was very well respected, and we were this young organization of vegans that lived in a school bus on a tofu farm. And we funded the organization by selling vegan hot dogs at Grateful Dead shows out of our Volkswagen van. So we had a lot of convincing to do to get the stockyard to shift and to get local officials and the community to understand that our position was humane, that it ultimately made sense, and that what the stockyard was doing, even though it had been doing it for nearly 100 years at that point, was not okay. It did not comport with humane, compassionate values that most people say they want to live by. So we organized demonstrations, raised a lot of awareness, we were able to get some news coverage, and over time, we were able to shift the thinking about the stockyard. And people started to see that what they were doing there was not okay. And we eventually were able to have them convicted of cruelty to animals, and that stockyard is now closed. And when I go back to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, there's another place I now visit. It's called the Lancaster Farm Sanctuary, which does your heart a lot of good to see this community which had been a centerpiece of this animal agriculture, this animal cruelty, and there's a sanctuary there now. And downed animals, we're continuing to work to prevent animals too sick to walk from being sold for slaughter in the United States. But it's still legal and it is still common. And unfortunately, animal agriculture is very powerful. And they have been able to exempt themselves from basic humane laws at the state level and also at the federal level. They're exempt from the Federal Animal Welfare Act. So we started documenting conditions of animals across the industry, and here are a few pictures. The one in the upper left-hand corner is a dumpster behind a hatchery that hatches out egg-laying hens. And these are the unwanted male chicks. They don't grow fast enough to be raised profitably for meat. They'll never lay eggs, so they literally throw them away the day they hatch. That's one problem. The female hens, the female chicks who are born at the hatchery go into these battery cages for egg production. And they live that way for about a year, sometimes 2 years, unable to even stretch their wings. Then the lower right-hand picture here are how pigs are kept for breeding. These are female mother pigs, sows, that live in these 2-foot-wide gestation crate. It's called a gestation crate because that's where they are during their gestation period, which lasts about 4 months. And then right before giving birth, they put these sows in another crate that is called a farrowing crate, which is also just 2 feet wide. But there's some additional space on the side for the piglets so that when the mother lays on her side, the piglets can nurse through the bars. And they'll keep them there for about 2 or 3 weeks. Then the babies are taken away to be fattened for slaughter. The mothers are re-impregnated, put right back in the gestation crate. So they live this constant cycle of impregnation, birth, re-impregnation in a 2-foot-wide metal enclosure their whole lives. And the last picture here I'm going to mention on the lower left is a dairy cow in a milking parlor. And for a cow to give milk, she has to have a baby. Cows don't lactate just for the heck of it. They lactate to feed their babies. So on dairy farms, baby calves are taken away from their mothers at birth, so that the milk can be sold for human consumers. And upstairs, there's actually a picture of many calf hutches, which is the unwanted male calves, or in some cases, female calves who are also taken away from their mothers at birth, and then they're raised in these hutches. But this is a very important bond between a mother and their offspring that is severed immediately. And the people who do this then start normalizing it and saying, that is okay. So as animal activists, we started coming in and saying, wait a second, is that okay? And most people are humane. Most people think other animals should be treated with more compassion. And we've been able now to start passing some laws. At the federal level, it's now illegal for downed cows to be slaughtered for human food. We're still trying to prevent other downed animals like pigs and sheep who are still downed and going into slaughterhouses, unfortunately. We're also working to outlaw some of these confinement systems, like the hens in the cages up there. Some states have now started passing laws to give them more space. And also these gestation crates for pigs, we're starting to pass laws to ban those. And it is citizens that are stepping up, getting involved, not only working with politicians, but in some cases, you're able to get enough signatures to put a measure on a ballot for a popular vote. And we've done this 5 times. Every single time we have done it, the citizens have voted to ban these cruel systems. So people, when they see this cruelty, think it's not okay. And they're starting to outlaw it. And we're continuing to work in other places like here in New York City on an effort to ban foie gras, where you have ducks and geese who have a pipe shoved down their throat where they're force-fed enormous amounts of food so that their liver becomes 10 times its normal size to produce foie gras. So the city of New York right now is considering a ban on the sale of foie gras, which would be significant. So we need to work to prevent certain cruelties. But what we also need to do is to prevent or to promote healthy plant-based living and plant-based eating and show people what they can do, not just what we should not do. So with farm sanctuaries, when we started back in 1986, there was one. There are now hundreds around the world, and that's a very good thing. But there are billions of animals who are raised and slaughtered every year in the United States alone, and tens of billions around the world. And if you include fish, it's trillions. So there is no way the sanctuaries could rescue even a small fraction of that, even if we rescued 1 million animals a year. So we need to change the food system. And over the years, we have worked on this. This is a picture from the 1990s. For anybody who knows Woodstock and knows hippies, that's Country Joe McDonald, who played at Woodstock, and we're demonstrating at Burger King saying, we want a veggie burger. And they actually did start selling a veggie burger in the 90s, but it wasn't as popular as what they are doing now. And many of you have probably heard about the Impossible Whopper that's now being sold nationwide in the United States. That's actually a picture that I took on my television during a break during an NFL football game. So this is mainstream America, and the Impossible Whopper is being marketed to widespread populations. So we are now at a time where people are starting to recognize that our food system is inhumane. They don't feel very good about what's happening to the animals. It is also unhealthy. We are taking medication on a regular basis. We are getting sick because of the food we're eating. And it doesn't have to be that way. And I am so happy also to see, doctors like Dr. Osfeld, who's here, promoting healthy plant-based food in hospitals. My father had a heart attack about 15 or 20 years ago now. And when he was in the hospital, after his heart attack, they were feeding him bacon and eggs. So that's an example of a bad idea, right? And the doctors, who are supposed to be health professionals, are giving him food that's going to make him sick and it's going to bring him back. Doesn't make sense, right? Unless you want to make a lot of money doing, bypass surgery and so on. But this is part of the economic model that is an unhealthy model that I think we need to really examine and explore and ultimately change. And animal agriculture is inherently inefficient. To raise animals for food, you need to grow lots and lots of corn and lots of soy and other feed crops. And you use enormous amounts of land. In the United States, 10 times more land is used for animal agriculture as opposed to plant-based agriculture. So there is now a discussion about the future of meat and what does it look like and do we need meat? And most people feel that what we're doing now doesn't make sense and we do need to start making changes. The question is, what do those changes look like? And I think it is very good to see Burger King selling the Impossible Whopper. It is very good to see restaurants like Kentucky Fried Chicken in the United States testing plant-based chicken nuggets. So these are very positive beginnings, but they are working with an industrial system that is ultimately not great. Fast food restaurants are not the healthiest. Even if you have a vegan nugget there instead of a chicken nugget there, it's a lot better, but is it really good? And I think these are the kinds of questions that we need to start exploring and asking, and looking at the widespread ramifications of animal agriculture. When I started back in 1986, my primary focus was on what was happening to animals and the ethics of harming other animals. Today, and as the farm sanctuary movement expands, I think we need to address other issues like workers' rights, the rights of citizens in communities who don't have access to good, wholesome food, and who only have fast food restaurants that are accessible. Ultimately, we should have whole foods, healthy plant foods, accessible in communities all around the US, all around the world. And so I think as the food system evolves, and as we as a species evolve, we need to start creating solutions. You know, like what is happening at Quintas das Aguas and other places where you are living with animals as friends in a compassionate way, which is actually good for animals and good for us. And you're growing plant foods that are healthy and nourishing, and you're doing it in a way that is not very wasteful. You're not using excess land and acreage to grow all the corn and other crops that are needed to grow to feed farm animals, so it's much more efficient. And you are not killing other animals, which is actually better for us, and it's better for the other animals. And you're eating food that doesn't make you sick, and you're not exploiting workers who work in slaughterhouses. And there are now convergences of issues that are starting to come forward. And all of these things connect, ultimately, to the way we eat. You know, there are many things in this world that seem very hard for us each to change. Like, how can we stop wars? How can we, address the climate crisis? And while many things may seem out of our control, we all have a lot of control over what we eat every day. And that choice has profound impacts. And, today, for example, as you mentioned, we have Greta out there talking about the climate crisis, saying that we as a species need to do better. The way things are happening now is unsustainable. And our future, the future of our species, depends on us acting in a more responsible way, in a more ethical way, in a way that does not keep extracting from the planet, which has been part of the model, one of extraction and exploitation, that basically reflects relationships of abuse, where certain groups and individuals that have power mistreat those and extract value from those that have less power. And of course, animals are a very good example of one group that has much less power than human beings. And so we are today mass-producing, genetically altering, confining, factory farming, and slaughtering billions of animals. And that is an example of an abuse of power. But we're also cutting down rainforests and destroying beautiful ecosystems, which is another abuse of power. And it's a few groups that are making a lot from that, extracting this value, extracting this profit, while harming the rest of the planet, while harming other species, while harming indigenous people who live in certain areas, harming people that live near factory farms. So some of this harm is occurring in the Amazon, but a lot of this harm is also occurring in places like North Carolina in the United States, where you have these pig factories that raise animals by the thousands and create these enormous waste lagoons that smell, they emit toxic waste into the air, they pollute the water, and you have people who live near these places who then are breathing this in. It is a form of environmental racism because many of the people who live near these places are people of color, or poor white people who cannot afford to live in other places. And so you have these systems of abuse where the companies who are profiting by this enterprise are putting other people at risk and putting the environment at risk and harming animals in the entire process. And it's a model of extraction. And one of the business structures has to do with big companies that contract with small farmers and the small farmer is responsible for building these structures on their property at their own expense, oftentimes going into debt to do it. They're responsible for providing all of the labor to take care of the animals, whether they're pigs or chickens. And then the company ultimately owns the chickens and makes the profit. And these people who work in this business have been seen and treated as indentured servants on their own land. And one of these people is Craig Watts, who was a poultry farmer in North Carolina, and he blew the whistle on what was happening, and he's now part of a movement of former animal agriculture workers who are now starting to speak out against factory farming, working with and connecting with communities in rural areas, saying this is not okay. And there has been litigation recently in the state of North Carolina looking at how certain communities are unfairly made to experience and be harmed by the waste and the pollution of factory farming. And for decades, there has been effort to prohibit these factory farms from polluting communities and making people sick. And usually the factory farms win. Recently, there has been a shift where courts have found the factory farms guilty, and they have made large awards to citizens for the suffering they have experienced. Unfortunately, shortly after these court cases were finalized and the citizens won, the North Carolina legislature passed new laws to restrict the payments of some of the settlement costs to the citizens. So this is an industry that is deeply entrenched, very powerful, and will work in these systemic ways to maintain their power. And that's why it is so important for us to work to ban cruel systems and to fight against the injustice that occurs in these communities, and to ultimately band together with other people who have aligned interests. And that is most people. Most people would rather not cause unnecessary harm. Most people would rather not destroy the planet. Most people would rather not eat food that makes us sick. So we have an enormous opportunity, I think, to combine with so many different sorts of movements, the climate crisis, but also health movements. Obesity, for example, is a huge issue, especially in urban areas of the United States. And the term food apartheid now is being used because oftentimes, again, these are communities of color that do not have access to healthy food. And people like Dick Gregory have been talking about this forever, connecting human rights with animal rights. He says violence causes the same pain, the same spilling of blood, the same stench of death, the same arrogant, cruel, brutal taking of life, extraction. We don't have to be a part of it, and we don't. And there are good things happening now. This is a place in the Bronx, New York, Green Bronx Machine, where they're teaching kids to grow food. And it's in a school where some of these people don't have homes, so it's an area that needs help. They're doing some really good work and empowering these kids. These are some pictures from Sweet Farm from Nate's place in California. He'll be speaking later today or tomorrow, where they are growing food, showing the solutions, showing also how tasty plant-based food can be, giving people the tools they need to cook it, and having foodie experiences on the farm. Here's another farmer in New Jersey, Ron Weiss, medical doctor, teaching people food as medicine. He's got a doctor's farmer's market there, and he's working with people in many cases who have lost like 100 pounds and are really doing a lot better. And it ultimately comes down to what do we eat and what are we best suited to eat. And if you look at our body, we're much better suited to eat plants instead of animals. We don't have sharp teeth like carnivores, And we can perform very well. Like Dotsie was talking about earlier, this is the only US male weightlifter to qualify for the Olympics in Rio in 2016. He's a vegan. I think he was also part of Dotsie's commercial, a vegan Olympian. And it's not only good for us physically, it's good for us emotionally. Connecting with other animals in a kind way does our heart a lot of good. And you see this at Farm Sanctuary all the time. We have sheep that love to be petted. They paw you. Pigs love belly rubs. I'm going to rush through here because I just noticed I'm short on time. Chickens love to perch. They are our friends, not our food. And this makes us happy as well as the other animals. And so being kind to other animals does our heart good, does the animals good. Seeing animals running around like this instead of going to slaughter is huge, and we're making enormous progress, enormous. New York Times read an article, "Stop mocking vegans because they were right." It's kind, it's healthy, it's sustainable. And last thing I'll end on here is an article headline when some animals came to our sanctuary, rescued from a 4-H agricultural program with kids. They didn't want to kill them. Headline, "Sanctuary, not slaughter." I think most people would prefer a sanctuary to slaughter. And it's wonderful to be here in this sanctuary of people who care and are making a difference. So thanks, everybody. Great to be here with you.